We are live.
All right, perfect. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I believe that we all know each other from PEPSC, obviously, but maybe we should just real quickly go around and say what we do just to help familiarize ourselves a little bit. This is the first meeting of the Educator Preparation Subcommittee, and Dr. Weddington and I are co-chairing this group. I'm Kim Winter, and I'm at Western Carolina University. I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Allied Professions here. And my background is in public school teaching, and we run one of the 9 lab schools in the state. I'll pass things over to Hank.
Hey, good morning. I'm Hank Weddington. I'm Dean for the College of Education and Human Services at Lenore-Ryan University. Looking forward to working with all of you.
How about Craig and then Kimberly?
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Evans keeps trying to provide an honorable doctoral degree to me, so I'm not Dr. Craig Smith. I am Mr. Craig Smith, but I'm the principal of Lake Norman Charter High School, which is in Huntersville, located in Mecklenburg County.
Great.
And I'll wrap this up. I'm Kimberly Jones. I'm the 2023 North Carolina Teacher of the Year, and I'm an 18-year English teacher in Chapel Hill Carberry City Schools.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And I don't see Dr. Fleming here, and we all know the amazing Kim Evans, who is our support from DPI. I think we can go on. Yep. So we're going to look at our charge here in just a second, but to give you guys an idea about timeline, our first meeting is today. We do have several meetings on the books, and part of our charge is to bring our recommendations to the commission by the May meeting. We don't feel like we've got a huge lift, so we're thinking that that's completely doable, and we might not even need a final meeting, but we'll kind of get started today and see where we land. So for this subcommittee part of the session law, there's a couple of pieces of it, which is why we have several subcommittees, but work that we've not done as a commission. And so what we are charged with is looking at requirements for appropriate pedagogy to be included in the residency license program, and then also which will include specific hour requirements, but what pre-service training and field experiences are needed prior to entering the classroom for folks issued a residency license, and then also what pre-service training is necessary prior to entering the classroom for individuals who are issued an emergency license. And I think that one may prove potentially the most difficult because those are often truly emergent situations, but that's what we're going to be looking at. And we did find some background information that we felt like we should be looking at as a committee. And so we're going to launch through that. I don't know, Hank, do you want to do some of that on the next couple of slides, or you want me to keep going?
I'm happy if you want to keep going.
Okay.
I'll jump in. That's great.
Okay, so for the first part, the residency license, what we want to look at. So we already know from the session law about the license. It's a 1-year license, renewable twice. It's got to meet these requirements that are listed here. So requested by the local board of ed, this person needs to have certification of supervision from a recognized EPP, and then the individual must meet all of the 4 requirements listed there: having a bachelor's degree, completed relevant coursework, or passed the relevant content area exam, enrolled currently in an educator preparation program, and then meet whatever other additional requirements are set up by the state board prior to teaching. So here's what we know in terms of content and pedagogy requirements in general. We felt like this was a good place to start. So there are some things that all EPPs in the state of North Carolina are required to do. And Dr. Fleming is here now, so I just thought I'd point that out. Hey, Dr. Fleming is a superintendent. I think is it Harnett County?
Harnett County, yes, right. And sorry for being late. I just got off a principal's meeting.
Perfect. We're glad that you're here. So we thought this could potentially be a really good place to start, is just looking at those content and pedagogy requirements, just to ensure that EPPs are remaining current, have a rigorous course of study, or aligned to national standards. This A through G on number 1, there are several things that we'll look at, but we know that our EPP instruction must include these things. So identification and education of children with disabilities, management of student behavior and effective communication. That's things like diffusing and de-escalating disruptive and dangerous behaviors. C is demonstration of competencies in digital and other instructional technologies. So this goes toward high quality instruction around digital teaching and learning for all of our students. D is skills and responsibilities required of educators, and that gets really more at standards and other aligned content that guide us. Expectations, that's the next one too. Expectations for student performance based on what the state standards have to say. Supply and demand for educators in the state. Our framework for appraisal of educators. And then we can keep going. I think the next slide has 2 and 3. Yep. So the second one is training for elementary education teachers. So there's an A through D on what must be included, things like coursework in reading, writing, and math, assessment prior to knowledge to make sure, or prior to licensure to make sure that candidates have knowledge in scientifically based reading, writing, and math instruction that's aligned with state board expectations. Instruction on formative and summative assessments within the classroom setting, as well as technology-based assessments, etc. And then instruction in the integration of arts education across the curriculum. So these are all things, by the way, that EPPs, like Hank and I, any of these programs, we're already familiar with these requirements. And again, we're reviewing these because we felt like this was a good place to start, things we know that are required, and thinking about that in the context of the residency and the emergency license. So I don't think I did the third one yet, Kim, I'm sorry. So the third one is training for elementary and special education general curriculum teachers. So that's all about early literacy intervention strategies, and then practices that are aligned with state standards, national reading standards, and there's an A through H specifically about the teaching of reading, reading proficiency, evidence-based assessments, et cetera, and given all the work we've been doing on the science of reading, letters training, I think most people in the state are pretty well familiar with that content now. I'm sorry, now we're ready to go on to the next one. And then the fourth one is specific training for middle and high school teachers. So there's an A through E here. So that's adequate coursework in content area, and then looking at mastery of content area through passing content exams, and then the teaching of content, which isn't the same as just content, right? So it's pedagogical kinds of things, and then training for science teachers. There's not specificity here, but it just gives us some general things about content related to science, and then of course laboratory safety. So the next one is about the required field experiences for EPPs. So basically what session law says is that there should be field experiences every single semester of a program. That does not, people always ask the question, does that mean every single course? It does not necessarily mean every single course, but it means as you go through the scope and sequence of a program set up that would lead to licensure or certification, there are applicable early field experiences leading up into that internship or student teaching year every single semester. So number 1 talks a little bit about organized kind of sequencing, engaging of students. So they're doing more than just observing, they're also practicing, demonstrating knowledge and skills, and have the ability to apply what they've learned, reflect upon it, etc. 2 is a minimum of 2 hours of field experience in the first semester, and then a cumulative total of at least 12 prior to students' internship. And I would just say, when you look at traditional EPP programs, that's an extremely minimal number. Most programs, particularly in elementary, special ed, middle grades, ones that exist within a traditional college of education, EPP, will have hundreds of hours prior to that student teaching year. I think when you get into some of the secondary fields and some of the K-12 fields, it's harder because of the content requirements. But this sets the base expectation. And then, of course, all candidates are required to have at least one field experience in what the state considers to be a low-performing school. So that was just in general what's required of preparation programs. So another place we felt like would be good to look is Licensure 1, a State Board of Ed policy, really gets at PD requirements for a residency license. So this is what the public school unit is responsible for providing during that first year. So there are 10 days of professional development required for a residency license. We felt like this was good to include because we don't need to feel the responsibility to be double thinking about these kinds of things. So when you just quickly, I won't read all of these, but you can glance through and see what the kinds of things are required throughout that first year, looking at standard course of study, reviewing curriculum guides, training and lesson planning, classroom organization kinds of things, positive management of behaviors. There's a whole set of things that are already required of the residency license folks by their public school unit. Okay, so when we look at emergency license, if we go on to the next slide, so the same session law does speak to emergency license just in terms of definition. So 1 year non-renewable license issued to someone who holds a bachelor's degree with coursework that's considered relevant to the requested licensure area. So it could be as simple as someone's going to be teaching high school biology and they have a degree in biology. It's not always quite that simple, but that's the sort of thing that this is referring to. But these are folks who have not already successfully completed a recognized EPP, so they do not qualify for a residency license at the time. Okay, so some things, and we're going to have an open conversation here in just a few minutes, but things that we felt like were open for us to consider and think about in terms of current practice. So we know in the state there is a description in legislation that talks about EPP coursework requirements, and there are 4 major things that are required. So we felt like this might be a good place to not overcomplicate it. We might want to just really kind of hone in on and consider these 4 things. So the identification of academically or intellectually gifted children, evidence-based practices as defined in the Every Student Succeeds Act, the teaching of diverse populations of students, so differentiation of instruction, and then classroom management. So those are the 4 major areas that are written into legislation. And then, okay, so we thought today what we do is go through, this is what our charge is, so we know what we've got to do, we know a little bit about the timeline, and then, the questions that we thought of when we met ahead of time to really think about this work was, what training is really feasible prior to entering the classroom? In an ideal world, someone would be hired well before the start of school, and you would have time in the summer to engage in specific training and experiences. We know that's not always the case. We know we have current positions that are open now. So it's not that we're still responsible for all of this and we want to think about it, but we do want to think about it in the context of what's really feasible prior to entering the classroom, and then what can take place perhaps in those 10 days and in other ways, and then what training needs to be happening after entering the classroom. So those are the two big questions. So I've talked a lot, kind of sort of, we tried to set the stage a little bit, and we'll open it up to you guys to really kind of share your thoughts and talk about that just a little bit. And if we want to go back to a reminder of our charge, I know I've gone back to that 6-7 times just to help my own thoughts kind of stay on course. We're thinking about what are the requirements in terms of pedagogy that should be included in a residency licensure program. And then what pre-service training and field experience needs to happen for residency licenses before you enter the classroom. And then what pre-service training needs to happen prior to entering the classroom for those who are issued an emergency license. And you'll notice in that number 2B, it doesn't say and field experiences. And I think that's a recognition of sort of the context of an emergency license.
And I do have a question on this. Are we looking from I assume we're looking at the viewpoints sooner than the new licensure levels, or are we assuming that the licensure levels, the new licensure levels will already be in place? So, for example, are we looking at classroom experiences as, say, an apprentice teacher needs versus a residency teacher that we know today?
Yeah, I think, and Kim might be able to speak to this, or even Hank, because you're not new to PEPSC like I am, but I think we cannot assume that the new licensure levels are happening.
Okay,
right?
that makes sense. We're making an assumption that this will take place or will be enacted either by the State Board of Education or the legislature prior to our new licensure model. Is that correct?
Dr. Fleming, this is Kim.
Hey.
So this is from Session Law 2017. So we've had this since the conception of PEPSC.
Right.
And
okay.
so it is something that we are delinquent on and we need to fulfill.
Yeah.
And so it goes with the current licenses.
Yeah. Okay, pretty good.
Sure.
I had a couple of points that I just noted while you were talking. And some of them might be questions that can be clarified, but in addition, when I'm thinking of pre-service before you get into the classroom, so potential changes to how we are training teachers. After having spent the year kind of traveling across the state and just from my own experience in the classroom, there are 3 big things that are coming up. And one is currently under their ed psych training, how much of that focus is on youth mental health? Because that is a major issue that I'm hearing from pre-service teachers, from veteran teachers. It's one that lots of veteran teachers right now are trying to find PD to deal with. And honestly, y'all, before we can talk about pedagogy, like if my students aren't in the right frame of mind, or if I don't have basic skills to help negotiate through an anxiety attack or a depressive episode, or even to sort of recognize that, it's the same way that our kids get, we have to do bloodborne pathogen training. I've never had a hemophiliac, but I've had a number of kids dealing with mental health crises. And before I can get to a nurse, and given what we know about child wellness across the state and the lack of school psychologists, et cetera, arming teachers with at least basic mental health first aid, I think would be a significant aid to pre-service teachers, to residency teachers before you ever come into the classroom, because we're seeing it as a reality, especially post-COVID.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I agree with you. I think it's essential. When we think about the beginning teacher trainings that we do all around the state. And some of the school systems put those together, the larger ones on their own. I know that the RESAs and NCAT, we've partnered with them and we've offered those for years. And that's come up for us. And while there haven't been any requirements put out for EPPs, we trained all of our faculty, every faculty in teacher ed, mental health first aid, and now all of our interns in their very first semester at Western.
Awesome.
Now, I can't tell you that that happens all around the
Yeah,
state. And
exactly.
it's not to say, you know, our students are more prepared per se, but it's a huge issue. And school systems were definitely reporting to us in the West that they really wanted their teachers as well. A lot of the school systems here have done that. And so there actually already is curriculum available for mental health first aid training.
Yeah, I
It's
took
not something
one
people would have
2
to
weeks
invent.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took one via UNC a couple of weeks ago, and it was great. And I sort of took it as a model to see what does this look like, and how feasible would it be. It was a one-day training, but it was definitely something that was at my list as I was looking at what's on board already. The second thing, we currently have the guideline around teaching diverse learners, and typically we think about that in terms of students with disabilities or sort of their academic differences. But what, if any, sort of hard and fast ideas do we have around infusing culturally relevant teaching and learning into that? Currently in North Carolina, 51% of our students are students of color. Only 20-some% of our teachers are teachers of color. And not to say, of course, that, you know, we don't enter the classroom with the best intentions for all students, but we know what we know from our perspective. And when our perspective does not look like the majority of our students, I think it deserves intentional conversation and intentional pedagogical choices around how to actually meet the needs of the students that we're serving. And I think that's something that could easily be incorporated into the pedagogy that we have right now. But just when I think of my own experience, and I had an amazing EPP, but when I look at the pedagogues and even, you know, who are the authors of those books? None of those people look like me. None of those people look like the majority of students I was teaching. So even when we think about what is the expertise we're arming our students with, who are the voices that we're treating as experts? So how are they shaping their own classroom pedagogy? So how can we be thoughtful about culturally relevant teaching and learning as part of those pedagogical choices? And the last thing, and then I'll be done talking, I know with our primary students, our primary education, that there is explicit literacy education. But again, as a classroom teacher, the reality is we have many 8 through 12 students who are not literate. And while, yes, we have literacy courses at the high school level, whether it be a biology class, an English class, a history class, et cetera, perhaps the ability to infuse some understanding of literacy instruction into secondary pedagogy is really helpful, even for helping teachers to recognize the student might need literacy intervention other than just saying, oh, this kid can't read. Understanding at least a basic understanding of the science of reading, I think, is important at every level, but especially in the secondary where those kids are going to have those EOCs. They are in their classrooms. And again, because of the realities of support staff, we don't always have interventionists, but at least having a basic understanding of how does literacy work? Because quite honestly, I'm a high school English teacher. I was a college English major, and I'm not a reading teacher. I can't tell you how reading works. I learned to do it and I do it. I can help my kids with comprehension. I can help my kids with making meaning, but literally teaching them the skill of reading is not something I have even as an English educator, but it's definitely, again, just based on the realities of what our classrooms look like now. I'm talking to lots of teachers, and even a cursory understanding of literacy education would be a game changer pre-service.
Right. Those are both great. And I would just say, going back to teaching diverse learners, you know, prep programs today, I think we would define that, of course, as that academic diversity, race, ethnicity, but I would add language because we will all teach emergent bilinguals. We will all
Absolutely.
have ELs in our classroom, and that is essential knowledge. And certainly we should be including literature that's current to today. And there are many authors of color today that are doing great work. Lots of resources that we could utilize for that. And being an English person myself, I totally agree with you on the literacy ed. I'm a middle school person. I think we've seen our field change quite a bit. Used to, we called it reading in the content areas, but now we've moved toward more of what you might call disciplinary literacy, which gives some of that background on language and literacy ed, and then helps people understand, for a math person, what is the language of your discipline? And so when something happens, how do you create an intervention for a student? We know from, I think it's fourth grade on, the number one reason why students don't do well in science is because of reading, not because of their science knowledge. So those are things we should be thinking about. These are 3 really important ones. Yeah, great. What else? I think one of the things that's difficult for me to conceptualize is this whole prior to the start of school, right? When I make a list, certainly I would put youth mental health first aid as a prior to the start of school. But honestly, on my list, on Kim's list, I would have all 3 of these things that Kimberly just mentioned, right? Because they're all 3 important. But I guess part of the question then becomes, so what do you do for the people, the late hires? Because there potentially will be residency license that come in after the start of the year. So there's this, on the one hand, what are we saying is important for them to have in terms of pedagogy and early field experiences in this list? But then there's also the, when someone gets hired, what do we ensure? Like, we might say a face-to-face mental health first aid training is important, but if that can't happen because of when you're hired, is there an online module? Like, is there something we can require people to do prior to the start of school?
I mean, to that point, is it worth exploring some sort of caveat of when someone comes on board mid-year that these types of requirements take place within a specific calendar expectation, knowing that, for on an annual year to year, a lot of these things, with the mental health requirements statewide and the beginning of the year tasks that, we've grown so accustomed to. But, to Kim's point, once you roll over after September, it's like everyone's going 100 miles an hour, and those things are, you're checking up on those few people that didn't get it done. And unfortunately, sometimes those mid-year hires, that can often get overlooked as, okay, well, we'll make sure you take care of that when we open up next year, which, when we're talking about these 2 licensed areas, we need to make sure it's the urgency is there because of the importance of the backgrounds that they have. So I don't know, is it, that we provide something that's a reasonable time period? That would be if someone comes on board, mid-year, that whatever we outline they'd have, and I'm not going to throw out any arbitrary number, but something that we would feel would be reasonable within a school setting, but also urgent enough that it highlights the importance of those areas.
Yes, and so Kim Evans, I've got a question for you then, because part of that language is about recommendations related to rules. So with things like timeline and what we were just talking about, does that fall under the rules? Like, we might have a list of expectations and then the other piece of it is a rule that we recommend?
Well, the expectations itself could be in a rule, because usually they want it to be as specific as possible.
Okay.
And when it comes to the timeline, we want to make sure that we have some flexibility in there, but also Rules Review Commission will want it to be as specific as possible too. They don't like the words that are ambiguous as far as timeline.
Yeah. I know, honestly, I feel like there is quite a bit of ambiguity. We often end up having that conversation.
Right, and that's what they try to avoid with rules.
Okay, so this is good. So this is good conversation and will be welcomed in terms of us making that kind of recommendation. So it looks like we have basically a month. Our next meeting is not until February 22nd. I'm not suggesting that we're ending right this second. I'm trying to think about a game plan for do people have other thoughts? Do we need to talk about more today? And what might be our homework to bring next time? Like, should each of us as members bring kind of our list and because I'm very interested from the superintendent and principal perspective, that whole realistic view on, because I know that's an issue, right? Like in an ideal world, we want this to happen prior to the beginning of the school, but then what's realistic? Can you say in that first semester, then X needs to happen, and then sometime by the end of that year, Y and Z. That's the kind of input that I think would be great for us to get.
And again, having a mindfulness that, if we're talking about emergency license and residency license, we're talking about areas that are challenging to fill. And if we're looking at what the time requirement would potentially be to fulfill this professional development that may or may not occur during a school day. Now we're talking about trying to make sure that classroom has the appropriate coverage. That's, as we all know, is an ongoing challenge for many school systems. So it's just, again, and I think that's really good to have our homework of when we bring back is literally how would this look in an actual school setting for our folks?
I just want to bring up the bottom details that it says that required 10 days of professional development may be completed through one of the following options. So the PSU can provide all 10 days at once prior to the start of instructional period, or they may provide 5 days of pre-service training with a commitment to provide an additional 5 days of professional development throughout the teacher's first year of residency licensure. So that's some flexibility there due to how that practice is provided now, currently in some of the districts. And I just wanted to point that out.
I think that's great. And I would just say that's really also what happens with traditional BTs. They do not get all their days at the beginning of the year. We work with the 18 westernmost counties, and they typically will do 4, and then they'll do some in fall and some in spring. So I think it's good to bring up that flexibility. The other thing that comes to mind is we're talking about any residency license or any emergency license. So that means we're talking about the BK world, CTE, all licenses, correct, Kim?
That's right.
So when we make recommendations, again, going back to Kimberly's list, I would say all 3 of those are applicable to everyone, right? But I do want us to make sure that comes up a lot for us. People will say that, because my middle school folks yelled very loudly when all the science of reading stuff got hot and heavy. They were like, why are we not included in this? We have so many students who can't read. So I just want to make sure we're really thinking about it from all those perspectives. So what do you think would be a good game plan because I think we need to do some significant thinking and come with some recommendations for that next meeting. I don't know if we want to, sort of split it up, and some people think about that whole piece of the before and after and timelines, and, another group of us come with a list of what we think is realistic that needs to happen, or should everyone do that?
I think it would be great if our public school folks could maybe look at what's realistic for them to do during that initial period. And maybe the EPP, you and I, Kim Winters, can think about what we are already doing in that first semester to try to supplant or to strengthen what's going on. I know we all have different residency license content, but I'm sure we probably hit the same things, but it'd be interesting to see what that first semester looks like and what we're already doing to try to help bolster what's supposed to be happening in the public schools, and then maybe compare those two and see where there's gaps.
Yes.
Hank and Kim, I have a question for you guys. What kind of, what if any, because again, I'm sort of speaking as a classroom teacher and someone who's just sort of traveling around, but do you all get feedback from your first years, like at a halfway point? Is there any sort of audit of like, not just how's it going, but is there any sort of audit of those BTs or of those residency teachers after they leave you all within that first year?
Yeah, so there are some statewide things that happen. We do get formal state surveys from beginning teachers and principals of those teachers.
Gotcha.
Their
Okay.
feelings, their thoughts,
Gotcha.
performance level, EVOS data is tracked. So there
Gotcha.
definitely are some statewide formal things.
Cool.
I think one thing that, someone in a residency license has to be enrolled in some kind of EPP program, but it doesn't say what. So that means some people really go into a program that's built for a residency person. Like they're just building out their certification. It's not even degreed. Some go into an MAT program. Some go into, so they're all kinds of different programs.
I see.
So I think that's something that would be on Hank and I to really think about. Make sure we're not just thinking about our own institutions and what we do, because there are a lot of different models out there. Some are 1 year, some are 2 year, some are it's just all over the place. Because really, honestly, the frantic phone calls that we get from individuals and school systems is, I'm getting this residency license, I need to be enrolled. What can I enroll in, right? You know what I mean? It's
Gotcha.
about how do I get this done to get the license? And so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I was just curious. Thank you.
And Kim Evans, I think that DPI has every residency license program's course of study. I think that was part of our renewal way back a few years ago. If we ever needed to look at that and see what we're offering across those different ones, if that's of any use.
So to phrase that in a question for Kim and your team, is that something that we could easily get access to? I don't, I think you guys would have to answer that.
And I know we completed it all online and it went into some kind of a system somewhere. So you would think the data could be pulled fairly easily, but I don't know that that's the case. And that was a while back.
Yep.
I'll follow up with Andrew. And then if there's questions about it, Hank, I'll reach out to you
Okay,
about
thanks.
the specifics around it,
Yeah.
what you remember.
Okay.
And so there was actually a database that, and I don't think we're using anymore. So that's part of that's why it may be problematic, but we had to answer a series of questions and actually put in all of this info for programs. But
I remember that. I'm not sure that that's available anymore, but I'll just check and see if any information from that is still available.
yeah. So just to kind of go back, I'm watching time too. So if our job, Kim and Hank, is just to kind of at least try to, by the next meeting, come up with, here's what we think the list should be of what should be required. And then Kimberly, Aaron, Craig, it's here's what we think is realistic, some information on timelines. And so the next meeting would be spent kind of merging those. You guys can say, oh, you left out so-and-so, and, you know, we can say, you know, whatever about timelines if we each kind of meet separately and bring that together. And I think, you know, in general, I don't think we have to do it in any scientific way, but I think Hank and I could make sure we look at a few other programs just so that we're not just thinking about our own. That might be helpful. And Kim Evans will maybe find out if there is any data that could be pulled about course of study. What else are we not thinking about that we need to bring to the February meeting? Okay, and everybody did we email out, everyone has this presentation, right? I see Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes, they do.
okay, so we can all.
I can send it with what I've filled in now.
That would be amazing.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
will do that.
Okay, that's great. And we have each other's emails, so we can kind of email separately about, you know, getting together to kind of have our lists or whatever, digging into that.
So for Kimberly, Craig, and Aaron, if you have more than 2 PEPSC members and you're discussing content of a meeting substantial, so this would be substantial meeting content, then it probably needs to all be sent to me. I can consolidate it, and then I can send it out to the 3 of you, because we would be bound by public meeting law with more than 2 PEPSC members meeting at once. Just a quick
Got it.
reminder.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Evans.
Sure.
Okay. Well, what do you guys think? Do we feel like we've kind of got a game plan so that we'll be bringing something to the next meeting? Okay.
Yeah, I feel good about, I think we have our walking orders for our next meeting, so I feel good about that.
Good. Excellent. Well, I appreciate it. I think it's important. This is important, you know, that we've not fulfilled this part of the responsibility of PEPSC, right? It's important that we do this. And again, I said this before, but I think the timeline piece is the complicated piece, just because we all know some of the realities we face. So that's the kind of barrier to get past of figuring out some recommendations. So I appreciate everybody. Anybody have anything else before we start to close up? Kim, anything we need to do for live stream so we don't have to do official votes? I'm assuming I don't have to ask for a motion to close or anything along those lines.
No, you don't.
Okay, so are we all good? All right, excellent. We'll get our stuff done and see you toward the end of February.
See you.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.